Hello and welcome to MacStories Unwind. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Fetici. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. You know what, Tici? I don't have a pick today. I'm feeling like the kid who didn't do his homework. But instead, I want to talk to you about a different media topic, which we haven't really touched on in a while, which is physical versus digital media, which I think is an issue that really cuts across all sorts of media, maybe some more than others. But what got me thinking about this, in part, was the fact that Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are coming out later this week, by the time this comes out, on the Nintendo Switch 2. And I'm curious whether you care at all about this, because as far as I can tell, the difference between this and the originals is pretty minor. I mean, those games came out on the Game Boy Advance, and in order to play with your friends, you had to have a cable that linked your devices together. This won't have that, of course. You can do local or I think online multiplayer type stuff. But beyond that, I don't think that there are a lot of differences between the two. And for what, I guess there are a couple of different topics here. One is this thing where companies constantly want you to buy the same thing over and over again in different formats, which is really bad in the video game industry, I think, more so than really just about anywhere. So there's that. But there's also the physical versus digital. And, you know, I know some people were unhappy that these games are not going to be part of the Nintendo Online subscription service. But on the other hand, when you think about it, the Nintendo Online subscription service, if you stop subscribing, or if Nintendo moves on to their next device and gets rid of it, like they did the Virtual Console, you don't have those games anymore. So, you know, at least if you pay $20 to buy this game for like the 15th time, you'll have it on your Nintendo Switch 2 for as long as that thing works.
Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, I used to be much more capricious about physical media years ago than I am today.
Okay. How so?
Part of it is just running out of physical space to store anything.
Yeah.
And especially when you become an adult and you buy a house and you share the house with somebody else.
Yes.
And you're the collector, and having to claim all that physical space to display your video games and your music records and your manga and your comic books and your books, you know, it's not nice to having to impose, that you are collecting all of these things when equivalent digital versions of those things exist.
Right.
So just space is a concern. But then also, the boring answer is convenience, especially for video games. Look, I still buy the occasional limited edition copy that I, put on a shelf and I look at it. Maybe it comes with an action figure, maybe it comes with an amiibo, maybe it comes with a pin. And every once in a while I do it. But there are so many inconveniences now. Sometimes I pre-order a video game, the physical copy, and I want to start playing that game at midnight, right? Because it unlocks on the eShop or on Steam at midnight. And I can't because I'm waiting for the physical copy, and the physical copy arrives the next day, sometime in the middle of the day. But maybe I'm working. Whereas, the digital game unlocks at midnight. I can just play for a couple of hours before I go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just the pure convenience of I don't have to carry around, a little box with all of my cartridges or a little thing with all of my PlayStation discs. I can just log into my account and let them download once again, which is what I did with my Nintendo Switch 2. I think I've purchased like 2 physical games since the Nintendo Switch 2 came out.
I was going to ask, which ones did you buy? I don't think I've not bought any physical games.
I think actually I bought one.
Okay.
And it's maybe the Dragon Quest remake.
Okay.
And everything else is digital.
Yeah.
But yeah, and look, I don't know. It obviously kind of sucks for local video game shops, right? And I mean, I know I have a
guy.
I have my guy. I've had my guy forever, and I still use my guy for those limited editions for consoles.
Yeah.
But it's increasingly, year after year, it's just becoming easier, faster, more convenient to buy digital.
Yep.
Now, your other thing about Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. I've seen so many people be upset about those games. They're $20 for each version, and they're basically unchanged since they're basically the GBA versions running with an emulator on the Nintendo Switch 2.
Yeah.
Look, I get it.
Yeah.
Right. Nintendo could have done much more. They could have been proper remakes. They could have been, taking advantage of the Switch 2 aspect ratio. So many things they could have done. But it's Nintendo. They've been doing this forever. It's really not a huge surprise to me that they have done the absolute bare minimum, and they just want to make money, and they want to make money off of the nostalgia for, millennials like me who want to revisit those memories. I am not too upset, and I still think I'm gonna just buy Fire Red and play Fire Red for the memories and the music and the region. I do wish. Did you see that there's a limited edition version of those games?
There is in Japan with it comes with a glass Pokeball and some other things.
I do wish that was attainable in
like
Europe.
The original Japanese box art, I think, is in there too, right?
Yes. So these days, I try not, just in general, I guess, I try not to get too upset about anything anymore.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty in the world to be upset about. Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green are two things you can probably let roll off your back, right? I mean,
of all things, yes.
Yes, I tend to agree. I think that they could have done a little bit something for the fans. Like maybe they should just both come in the box for $20, for instance, or maybe $30. I don't know. It seems like it does seem like a pretty brazen money grab in that sense, which, as you said, is not super surprising. I mean, I think I'm a lot like you in terms of the digital versus physical. Like, even my wife, who reads she reads like, I don't know, a few books a week or something. She reads constantly. She has gone completely digital because she reads so much. And it's like, well, now she doesn't have to go to the library. She can have a Libby account and just download the books on her Kindle without having to go to the library. Or she can buy them on there. And it's just a lot more convenient to have a Kindle to do that. And then we don't have, there was a time back in the day, probably when, Fire Red was coming out in the mid 90s, where we had a lot of books in our house. And you know what? When we moved, we had a lot of dusty books, and we donated them all because they were just taking up a lot of space, and they had been read, and they weren't doing us any good, and they weren't doing anybody else any good either. So we donated those all. And we very rarely will buy books now. Like, I will buy once in a while, like what is effectively like a coffee table book, something like a book about old handheld consoles with really good photography in it and that kind of thing. But I don't even do that all that much anymore. And I'm similar with the games. Like, I think when the original Switch came out, I bought a handful of games so that I would have them right when the thing launched. And I've still got those. And they are like shoved in a cabinet somewhere, and they don't get played as much as the digital games because they're less accessible, because I have to go find them and put them in the Switch. Whereas, when I got the Switch 2, I had this giant library of digital games that I just downloaded, and I was like, I've got all the space on here. I just play them. And there are drawbacks to that for sure. But I'm kind of willing, I guess, to take those drawbacks in exchange for the convenience. And as a result, I probably should be less unhappy about things like having to be offered another version of Fire Red just to play it on the Switch too. And look, I have plenty of ways to play that game anyway. I can emulate it on multiple handhelds that I have. So, there are other ways to do it. So whether I buy that one in particular, who knows? But yeah, I don't buy physical movies and TV shows. That's all downloaded now. Games pretty much the same, and books. How about music, Federico? You got a record player, so are you buying vinyl?
That's the one exception. I do. I am buying some records. I'm trying not to overdo it, again, because space is limited.
Sure.
But Sylvia was kind enough to give me this record player for Christmas, and that's an area of my life where I'm still buying the physical media, because it's just so nice to have that physical media.
Yeah, it's kind of like an experience. It makes it like an event almost.
Yeah. John, I don't have a new pick for you, but I have a follow-up pick
Okay.
from last week. We now finished season 2 of Emily in Paris, so we're flying through this TV series. And funnily enough, I have to voice the complaints that I voiced last week about German. This time about French.
Oh,
Because
they
in
went
season 2.
Season 2. They went for it, huh? With the subtitles.
We only enjoyed half of season 2 because the first half, it's like they did the exact opposite of what I was actually talking about last week.
Yeah.
There were so many moments where they just went full French
Oh.
for like almost the exact opposite. And now I don't know because this show came out years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe it's possible that after season 1, they took in some of the feedback from French people saying, look, it's not realistic that these French characters are talking in English when they are with one another without Emily present. Why are they talking in English? And so for season 2, especially for the first 5 episodes of season 2, they decided, well, we're just going to let them speak French for several minutes. And Sylvia and I were about to drop off. We were like, we don't want to watch a French TV show. With all due respect to the French.
Yeah.
It's just so tiring having to read the subtitles without paying attention to what's going on. And then they found their footing again in terms of balance. So my impression is that they tried to overshoot to fix a potential problem for season 1.
Yeah.
And then they realized mid-course they were doing it too much. And so they adjusted for the second half of the season.
Interesting. Yeah. It's funny because, what you said last week, I mentioned that to Jennifer and then a few days later we were watching Hijack again. And she started complaining about the subtitles. She goes, oh, this is what Federico's talking about. Yep. It's like, yeah, this is exactly it. I mean, here's a question for you. As someone who grew up obviously speaking Italian, when an American movie or television show is dubbed into Italian, how is that? What is that experience like for you as someone who is a native Italian speaker? Because I know, like, when we watch a Netflix show, like there's a lot of things on Netflix that are dubbed into English from, there may be a Spanish show or German or whatever it is, and it's always really badly done.
This is something that you don't know about Italy.
Okay.
We have a long history of excellent voice actors.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. To the point where I need to describe this. To the point where in Italy, if we think of a popular American actor like Al Pacino or Marlon Brando or Stallone, we think of the actor, but we also think of the Italian voice actor.
Interesting. And they use the same voice actor for each.
Yes. That's the thing.
Interesting.
That's the thing. For decades, they have used the same person who became the voice for Brando or for Robert De Niro
Right.
in Italy, right? And so when you hear that voice actor somewhere else, in Italy you would say, oh, that's Al Pacino. But it's not, right?
That's so weird. It's very interesting.
It's very much a cultural thing where we associate these particular people, excellent actors, by the way, who then went on to actually have careers as actors, like on TV and the movies in Italy. But they were also the voices of American actors, right? And so actually sometimes watching an American movie dubbed in Italian, I can tell you there are some cases, like I love watching the old Rocky movies in Italian because the voice actor for Stallone back in the day, it's like put on such an excellent performance, and that's one of the things that I guess you don't get in America, right? Because most of your Hollywood movies are obviously produced there,
right,
and they are in English, and so the voice is also the actor. Here we get to have two things: the actor and the voice.
Yeah.
And it's not all good, right?
Sure.
But there is a long tradition to Italian voice actors that it's a bit of a weird thing, But it's also, I love the Italian voice actor for Matt Damon, for example.
Oh, really?
Or Robin Williams. Like Good Will Hunting is excellent in Italian. Yeah.
That's
So
really
the
cool.
thing.
No, that's very cool. I think for me, the reason I associate it with it not being very good is that for us, it's more of a recent thing in that a lot of times it's like Netflix streaming shows where, for instance, I know France has a rule that if you're going to stream in France, a certain percentage of your shows have to have been created in the country. And for those, what Netflix will do, and I know Apple makes some shows in France too for the same reason, they will dub them into English for the American market. And a lot of times they're just not done very well. Maybe they weren't very, big budget shows to begin with on Netflix, but yeah, it's usually pretty mediocre. So,
Well, that's your bit of Italian culture
all
and
right,
history
all right.
for you
We'll see.
today.
We always stumble into a little something every week. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Be sure to check the show notes for a MacStories Unwind deal. And if you haven't noticed, we have occasionally been posting on social media pre-release movies and things that are showing up on Apple TV, just so people can follow that account and get a little bit of information about what's coming up next on Apple TV. So check that out. There's usually links in there for you to go check it out on the app as well. And in the meantime, you can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net and on social media. Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.